Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football. Got a good show for you today in our fourth in a multi-part series looking at NFL draft prospects. We are at the wide receiver group today, and it starts at the top, talking about one of the best prospects in the entire draft, regardless of position as well. It's a great depth class, probably, I would say, the second best overall position group class in the draft. There's just a ton of talent and players to talk about. It'll be interesting to see what the Seahawks do because of potential question marks around Tyler Lockett and his contract and age. Don't think anything's going to happen with DK Metcalf, but both have contracts that could be adjusted and manipulated to help the Seahawks with their salary cap going into the free agency period this season. And there's a lot of prospects in the draft. Now, if we didn't touch our wide receiver room, we're probably not talking about drafting a wide receiver this year, although
we might middle or late rounds.
Although, you know, if you're John Schneider, you're looking at a 3-year plan. You've got a new regime coming in, depending on what they want to do as far as getting their own guys in. They may want to remake the room a little bit. And you're looking at Tyler Lockett coming up on a contract situation after this next year. And then, DK Metcalf as well. So you kind of want to keep that room stocked, even though it looks loaded today. Next year, this time, we're going to be talking about needing a wide receiver, and it might be an advantage to have one already on the roster that you've kind of had in your offense for a season. So welcome in, Keith. Lots to talk about.
This is, there's almost too many players here. There's so many. We spent 45 minutes on 10 or 11 tight ends in our last show. Now we've got 40 wide receivers. We may be here, for a month.
Let's try not to.
No, it's not. We'll try and keep this at a reasonable length for a show. But there's just a lot of guys, and there's so many guys, and there's so many good players in this one. You've got guys in this draft class that are, the third, fourth best wide receiver in the class that honestly would have challenged any wide receiver in last year's class to be the number one.
It's true.
And, you got the JSN and Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison. Those were the top three last year. And I'd take Marvin Harrison Jr. over any of them. And the same is true for a couple of other guys. There's some elite talent in this, and then the depth, it just keeps going. So
I would say arguably Marvin Harrison, and that's the player we've everyone wants to talk about. We'll talk about him for a little bit here, even though the Seahawks have no shot at him whatsoever and wouldn't draft him. I think even if he was maybe if he was sitting there at 16.
If he's sitting there at 16, you'd be hard to say no.
Right.
You'd be drafting him, and Tyler Lockett would be on the way out because you would need additional draft capital because you just spent your only pick in the first 2 rounds on the one position you don't need. But he's such a just a tremendous talent.
He's a generational talent, really.
He really is.
And arguably,
kind of like his dad. I mean, honestly, like
we're trying to find things we don't like, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, though, if you take a look at it, blinders off, you just kind of looking at it from a realistic perspective, he's arguably the best prospect in the draft. I mean, you can put Caleb Williams on top if you want to, regardless of positional value. But Marvin Harrison is really legit. 6'4", 205, has blazing speed. I think he's been GPS clocked at over 23 miles an hour like several different times. He's on
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Feldman's freak list at number 2 overall for all the athletic attributes that he has. It just really does it all. It's going to stretch your defense no matter who drafts him. He's going to be the number 1 wide receiver on your roster, and probably come into the league as, in a top 5 wide receiver conversation already. And he's just that good. Now, the thing that freaks me out the most, there's going to be some movement at the top of this draft, and it's going to be around the quarterback position. Now, I think Marvin Harrison's the first non-quarterback to be drafted off the board, but it's very interesting to see where he's going to go, because you've got Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels all sitting up there as the quarterbacks that are going to go at the top. But I would argue Jaden Daniels is probably really, if you were looking at a big board, for example, if players as far as prospect value, regardless of position, I would have Jaden Daniels down closer to the 20s.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of players up at the top, but there's going to be so much movement at the top for teams to move.
Yeah, if you remove positional value away from things, which is hard to do because you set your big board up by the order in which people will be drafted, and that includes it. But if you just look at talent and take positional value out, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the number 1 prospect in this class.
Yeah. It's really close. I mean, Caleb Williams and him both. Yeah. Just the way that they're going to affect a team, in the NFL.
I would put him above, because I think he's got a much higher floor than Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams isn't tall. And his game is not as perfect as I think the media would have you believe. He's a really damn good prospect.
I would have Brock Bowers. We just talked about Brock Bowers in our last show. I would have Brock Bowers in this conversation as well, like, in the top 5 anyway.
Yeah, honestly, those could be your top 5. The 3 quarterbacks, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brock Bowers. I wouldn't have any problem with that. I really wouldn't. I think that's it's an incredible group of players. I just said group of kids. God, I'm feeling old now. I'm just going to sit here and drink my coffee. But no, Harrison, I mean, there is nothing in his game that I don't like. There's nothing.
I'll say one thing. His height, maybe slightly. He's only, he's going to be listed at what, 6'3"?
Well, he's listed at 6'4" on a lot of things. He'll probably be 6'3".
6'3". So his weight is 205. I think that he could probably, he's a great route runner, all that stuff. He could probably stand to improve a little bit of his breaks out of his speed, because he's so fast. I think he has a tendency to kind of overrun his routes a little bit. Mm-hmm. But man, talk about nitpicking. I mean, whatever he is, his quarterback is going to love him and adjust to whatever athletic freakishness that he has. But
there were times in his tape when he would round off his routes rather than coming up and making sharp breaks, because he knew he could simply just run away from people. And he did. And then there were other times where he ran pro-ready routes, where he would, right at the top of the route, he would sell one way, go the other on a really sharp break, and just look like uncoverable. And you put those two things together, and we are talking about a very special player.
Well, and you kind of nailed it right there when you said, as far as what he does to set up his defenders and stuff. His IQ of how to play the position is top notch. He's been around his dad for a long time. He's just evolved more at the position. He's going to be NFL ready. Mm-hmm. More than any other player, I think, in this draft. Although I will say Malik Neighbors from LSU has some unique qualities.
A lot to like there too,
as well. And I didn't want to move off Harrison too quickly, but this show, like you said, could go for hours.
I will say one last thing about Harrison. Usually, when you get guys that are just physically talented, it's off the charts, and they've got the famous parent And so there's a little bit of that, nepotism effect where everyone thinks they're awesome and whatever.
Mhm.
They tend to be lazy. And Harrison, I've heard so much stuff coming out of Ohio State that he is one of the hardest working guys, that he spends more time in the weight room than anybody else, that he's always out running, working on his body, doing things to improve. And that is just, you put he's the whole picture. He really is. Like you have that plus all the other stuff. Like, yeah. Okay. Now you wanted to move on. You want to talk about, Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, I would, it's interesting because you take a look at Neighbors and then you take a look at his playing mate, Brian Thomas Jr. I like actually Brian Thomas slightly better just from a physical profile and fit in the NFL. But maybe that's not necessarily true. Neighbors is going to be a great slot receiver. I don't know that he's going to be necessarily an outside receiver because he has that really good shifty quickness, but not great over the top long speed. But Neighbors is everything you'd want and probably had arguably a better season in 2023 than Harrison had, catching balls from Jaden Daniels at LSU. It was just really the entire offense revolved around this kid. So he's going to be a great prospect as well. He would be a perfect replacement for a Tyler Lockett. I know it seems weird to be talking about replacement for Tyler Lockett. Lockett's on the roster. He's under contract, et cetera, but something's going to happen with Tyler Lockett this offseason. I think it's either going to be a restructure or there's going to be a little bit of a trade, or there's going to be, I don't think that they'd outright cut him. But you got to start thinking about what you do, down the road, replacement wise. We've already got JSN on the roster, but you're always going to try to be looking for that second, third wide receiver in the room. I'm not saying we would go after a Malik Neighbors, but a guy like that would be a great fit on a Seahawks
Neighbors is going to be I think he's going to be a top 20 pick.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And a guy
top
that
10, arguably.
Probably top 10, but we already talked about the guys that are going to go to the top 5, and that's going to leave the best defensive.
And there's some other players, and especially on defense and on the offensive line that we haven't even got to yet.
Yeah, and so that's why I mean, like somewhere in there, you can't have 20 players taken in the top 10. So he may be one of those that drops into the top 20 or into the 20 range, but only because there's just a lot of great players in this draft. But there is so much to like about him. And I know you said you like Brian Thomas. I don't dislike Brian Thomas, but I think that Neighbors is the better prospect. He's just a guy that, yeah, you could take him and Tyler Lockett and put their tape side by side, and you'd see a lot of things that work well. Just the speed, the fluidity in and out of breaks, their ability to get off the line, even when someone's up to jam them, their ability to make tough catches through contact. Yeah, he's also the youngest player, one of the youngest players in this entire draft. He turned 20 not long ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
He's going to be done with his first contract and be up to be, to get his next contract and still be younger than some of the people being drafted that year.
Isn't it? That's crazy to me. So let's talk about a homegrown prospect, at least for the state of Washington, that folks are going to be familiar with. Rome Odunze. Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Odunze.
Wide receiver out of Washington, 6'3", 201. It's going to run close to a 4.49, 40.
You were 201. I've got him as 215.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So 215, very athletic, high points the ball. He looks like a seasoned pro. I think he would have been one of the top wide receivers in the 2023 draft.
Yeah,
if he had elected to come out. Yep. And just for upside, I mean, and then he put together back-to-back really solid seasons, very consistent.
He had 1,640 yards this last year.
which is amazing. Didn't that is that tops in the NFL in
It was
college
in
football?
tops in college football.
Yeah.
I mean, he topped 100 yards in 10 different games.
Wow.
He was productive in every single game. He was, the quarterback has the ball in their hands every play, so it's easy to look at them and say, oh, they're the best player in the field. But when you watch them, Odunze was probably the best player on the field when he was playing, and that was true in a lot of games, and even in the national title game in which the Husky offense got pretty much shut down. Odunze was still productive. Like,
yeah, I think, he reminds me of like a a faster, more explosive, potentially more explosive, like Keenan Allen.
God, and
Just
Keenan
a really
Allen has
nice,
been really productive.
yeah, just a
as a
really
pro.
nice, productive pass catching pro, a guy that can move the chains, a guy that's going to be productive for you, like a Cooper Kupp kind of productive, 7 to 10 catches a game kind of a guy potentially. Although things will get interesting in the NFL, because if Odunze is the team's number one wide receiver and he's going to get all the double coverage and so forth, things could get interesting because he's going to have to adjust to that.
Though, where you've got a DK Metcalf pulling coverage, or not just in Seattle, but pick another NFL team where you've got a number one pulling coverage and suddenly he's getting single coverage on every play. He's going to be giddy because he's been being double covered for the last 2 years at Washington. And so, yeah, like how often did he ever get
really
single
depends.
Coverage?
It really just depends on whether he's going to be fast enough to separate from NFL quarterbacks. I mean, he's projected, Keith, to be 4.37, but I've also seen some reports where he's going to be in the 4.5 range. And if he's in the 4, like coming out of the combine, if he's closer to 4.5 as opposed to 4.3 something, then teams may evaluate him slightly differently.
I watch him run away from really good cornerbacks on his tape. I don't see him being 4.5. If he doesn't run a 4.37, okay, fine. He'll be a 4.43. And which is still plenty fast enough.
Yeah. He's got it all, really. I mean, height, weight, length, and you add the speed into that and the acceleration. You mentioned the acceleration. I don't care how fast he is. If he accelerates away from players, that's enough in the NFL. We saw what Jake Bobo did in Seattle. If you can accelerate, if you can separate, then that's the key.
Yeah.
Is there any downside to his game?
Honestly, I don't see it. I think he's a top 20 talent in the draft. I think he's a legit player. And
does he need a player like Penix who can sling the ball just as good as anybody? Does he need a quarterback like that thrown to him?
Maybe, but not really. He gets open. The guy gets open. This isn't a case where, he doesn't get separation. And so he needs a player, a quarterback that can fit things into really tight windows for him to look good. He creates separation. I think he's fine. His numbers were partly because of Penix and that offense, because they threw the ball as much as anyone and, led the nation in passing offense. But his tape is more than just what you see on the stat sheet. He's just a complete player.
So we had mentioned the idea that we could talk for hours. I was going to try to combine some prospects a little bit.
Yeah, we're 20 minutes in, we're through 3 players.
Yeah, just group a couple of things. So I was thinking about Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, and Brian Thomas. I'd mentioned Brian Thomas a little bit as kind of a guy that I like out of LSU for different reasons than neighbors. He's 6'4", 205, and has a little bit of speed with him, and he's kind of really smooth and long strides, good top speed, but his best attribute, I think, is his ability to high point the ball. He's good on playing the ball. A guy like Troy Franklin, who was at Oregon, played with Bo Nix, the kind of the downfield burner guy, going to run in the low 4.3s and break away. Like he get the ball in open space and he's going to be gone.
He's 6'3", but he's only 187. I'm so worried about him. And like, he's got such a thin frame.
Yeah.
I mean, but he's not a guy that's going to get pounded and take a ton of contact because he's going to be down the field.
Except if he's a kick returner.
Oh, he won't. Yeah. But yeah, so you mentioned those guys. You also said Brian Thomas, 6'4", 205 out of LSU. You said you liked him more than Malik Numbers. I think that he has
he's just different. He's a different player. I think he's going to be an outside X receiver for you as opposed to a guy that's going to play in the slot.
Yep. And then you didn't mention him, but I think you can include him in the same category as Adonai Mitchell out of Texas, who's 6'4", 196. Again, he's a little slower than the other guys at a 4.5 is where he's projected, but all of these guys are X receivers. They're all flankers. They're all the guys that can be, that typical, they're on the very outside. They're the split end. They're oftentimes on that side by themselves with bunch coverage or bunch formations and stuff happening away from them. And they're expected to stretch the field and use all that space. And you need guys that can do that. And you need particularly height helps. And all these guys are 6'3" or 6'4".
My favorite wide receiver out of this group that we were just talking about, Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell. My favorite player out of this group is Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State. I watched some tape on him just this morning. In fact, 6'4", 215 pounds. He's so perfect. Like as far as the numbers are concerned, his physicality, his physical profile, impressive athlete, explosive, contested catch guru. Like if you throw it up, he's going to catch the ball. He's strong. His hands are really strong. He's going to fight for it. Press coverage, yards after catch kind of player, can return punts, can return kicks. Guys, the team that drafts Keon Coleman is going to get a player, like an NFL player. He's just kind of ready-made. The other guys, the Troy Franklin, the Brian Thomas, the Adonai Mitchell, they all have little holes in their game that I'm not sure translates completely to the NFL, but Keon Coleman does.
I will say the one flaw that I see in Keon Coleman is at the line of scrimmage. He is a little sluggish off the line, has a hard time getting through a good press on him and creating the separation needed off the line of scrimmage when the guy's up in his face. But that can be taught. It really can be. We've seen guys come in that aren't good at that. And then, a couple of years later, they're very good at that. And he's got the athleticism to make that jump.
And I think he's just one of the strongest wide receivers. So you're talking about a guy that can block. You're talking about a guy that can contested catch.
Yeah.
There's a spot for him.
He's got broad shoulders. He's, he's not slim at even the 6'4", 215. He looks like kind of the way DK Metcalf looks, but without the insanely extra muscles that Metcalf has.
So one of the other players beyond Keon that I like in this draft more than any other player is Xavier Leggett. Now this kid struggled at the Senior Bowl. Yeah. He really did. He had drops. He just mentally, something happened there. I think it's actually going to cause him to drop a little bit in this draft. But his insane measurables, plus low 4.3 speed, could even touch 4.29. Is something that you just can't ignore, and you go out and watch him beyond the Senior Bowl, and he did really well. He did really well for himself, and it's something that teams are going to have to watch because he's a mismatched guy. Good speed for a big wideout. He could sneak into the first round. He's got that kind of talent, but that head stuff, got to figure that out. You're on mute, Keith. Are you on mute?
I was really disappointed. I wanted him to come in at the Senior Bowl and really just establish himself as a pro prospect, and he didn't. And it's really disappointing because I think he's one of those guys that had an opportunity to come in and make people take notice, and then you'd see him up as like a second round pick and get people excited. But instead, he came in and he just kind of faded, and it wasn't a good week for him. And he might be a 4th or 5th round pick after that.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
That's how bad the week was, though.
Yeah, I know. But you know what? Scouts have watched this kid for a couple years, 2-3 years.
I know.
And one game, 1 week, it's tough. I don't know. I don't know what happened at the Senior Bowl.
A whole week of practice against other pro prospects, and he looked bad. It's hard. It's unfortunate. I think he's better than that. I don't think he
had 71 receptions for 1,255 yards and 7 touchdowns. He had a great big game against North Carolina. 9 catches for 178 yards. Georgia, 7 catches for 71 yards. Played at South Carolina. So but his measurable, you could be right. I mean, you could be right if the guy falls, into the third. I think he's gone by the 3rd round. I mean, he's not getting out of the top 100 picks.
I don't think he gets out of the 3rd round. Like, there's no way. But if teams view this and he doesn't have answers for, what happened there, and or especially if at his pro day he drops a couple balls again, you could see him start dropping because teams aren't going to trust, that he will show up on game day, because if they're like, well, when the pressure is on, if he starts dropping balls, like, is this a guy we want to take a risk on? And he may drop. I hope what happens is he comes out on his pro day and he doesn't drop anything and he looks awesome. And people are like, okay, so he was sick or had a bad week or whatever, but he's a legit player, because that's who he is. I think he's a legit player. I think he's a guy that's going to go lower than he belongs, and somebody's going to get a fantastic receiver.
So there's 4 players in a bucket for me: Ladd McConkey, Jalen Polk, the wide receiver from University of Washington, Brendan Rice, the son of Rice, Jerry Rice, and Ricky Parasol. You could even add Johnny Wilson, or even Roman Wilson from Michigan to this list. Just this class in like the back of the 2nd to the end of the 4th round is the meat and potatoes of the wide receiver class. I mean, somebody that's going to get like a Jalen Polk from Washington is going to get a hell of a receiver. God, somebody that drafts Ricky Parasol. He's only 6 foot and 193, but my goodness, the guy's a route runner. I mean, he can manipulate you and his quickness and so forth. There's just a lot to like about each individual wide receiver. Brendan Rice at the Senior Bowl was really impressive at 6'2", 212 pounds, ran a 4.38 40.
You wonder why he's listed that low, because he's got the measurables. He ran faster than most people thought. He's a good route runner, good hands.
He could be a riser for sure.
And he's freaking Jerry Rice's son. So
you'd
think that, like Marvin Harrison, his dad, people look at them and every time you see him play, they mention his dad, and his dad's a Hall of Famer and all of that. Well, now you're talking about some freaking Jerry Rice, the best that ever did it. And yet he doesn't seem to be getting the same bump. Right. It's weird.
The reason is because there's a ton of players. I mean, Jacob Cowing, the wide receiver out of Arizona, Keith. Johnny Wilson, the freak. He's a freak. At 6'7", 234 pounds, he's probably ended up being a tight end.
6'7". Yeah, he should have come up on our last show at 6'7", and
right
at that weight. Like, there were guys that weight and size, or
right.
that height and size on our last show, tight end.
But Milwaukee Corley, the kid out of Western Kentucky. We'd already mentioned. I don't know if we mentioned Aeneas Smith, the wide receiver out of Texas A&M. There's another wide receiver, Xavier Weaver, Roman Wilson had a great week at the Senior Bowl. Tez Walker out of North Carolina. We'd already talked about Brendan Rice. Just a lot of guys. Cornelius Johnson, you probably never even heard of him. Wide receiver out of Michigan would be interesting for Seattle at 6'3", 211 pounds. Guy had 47 receptions for 600 plus yards and a touchdown. Here's a guy that could be available in the 5th, 6th round. So I'm talking
run heavy offense that knows how to block downfield.
Yes,
right.
And special teams guy, and their special teams coordinator came over from Michigan. So,
two guys that I think we've skipped over that I want us to jump back
sure
to
we
is
have.
Xavier Worthy out of Texas and Jermaine Burton out of Alabama. They're both 6 foot, under 200 pounds. Worthy's at 172. Burton's at 190. Both of these guys are going to run in the very low 4.3s or in the 4.2s, just pure speed. And that is their game. They're not big, but they fly. And I see kick returner, punt returner, and a guy that you stick out there and you let them put pressure on the defense because they can run by any corner. And so you have to keep your safeties back when they're on the field and they're running those deep routes. And are they going to be massively productive at the next level? I mean, are they going to be massively productive? Probably not, because they're not going to be getting 10 catches a game or 8 catches a game. They're going to be getting 2, but the 2 they get are going to be they're going to average 25 to 30 yards per reception. And they're just going to continue to put pressure on defenses and create space for other people. And that's the kind of thing that teams like to have as their 4th or their 5th wide receiver, especially a guy that earns their living returning kicks and punts and that kind of stuff. And then you stick them out there and teams have to acknowledge them when they're on offense as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's fast. I mean, 4.29, 4.31, both those guys.
Yeah.
An interesting diverse class. I mean, it's anybody's guess at this point. And we keep saying this, and it's just so true that we just don't know what Seattle's approach is going to be this year. You've got a defensive minded head coach. You've got a brand new to the NFL offensive coordinator who orchestrated one of the best offenses in all of college football at the University of Washington. And we still don't know what they're going to do, what their plan is. It's hard to know what the roster building plan is. We've watched John Schneider for years, but it still feels all brand new this year.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Did we even mention Jalen McMillan out of Washington? 6'1", around a 4.4. He's the 3rd Husky wide receiver, and he's probably not going to get past the 4th round. Maybe not even out of the 3rd.
He could be underrated.
The guy is serious athlete, just pure athleticism. He reminds me of Golden Tate, a guy that he's going to win with athleticism and yards after the catch and all of that. May not win early in routes initially, but will get open, will be productive. But
here's a kid that's going to run a sub 4.40. Yeah.
But he's the 3rd wide receiver. That Husky offense was freaking loaded. Can we just say that? Because we're still talking about 3rd, maybe early 4th round guys, and we're on their 3rd player. There's no other team that has that many wide receivers in this class in that range. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. As we get closer, I think, to the draft, after we get past free agency and we kind of know what's going to happen with contracts with DK Metcalf, with Tyler Lockett, it's going to make this a little bit easier to evaluate. I think if they don't touch Tyler Lockett's contract, past March 18th or whatever it is, he's going to be on the roster at $27 million, which doesn't seem attainable to me, but it is what it is. But if something happens there, either he's traded or adjusted or whatever, there could be some, depending on how it's adjusted and what kind of money's pushed into 2025, 26, it could give us a window as to what their plan is long term with Tyler Lockett, and then give us a better feel for what they'd be looking for in the draft.
I will say this is a team that needs a wide receiver, not a first or second round. Like, we need a guy that's going to come in and be productive right away, a wide receiver, but they need a wide receiver because
they've got Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jake Bobo, Derek Young, and Dwayne Eskridge under contract.
Yes. And so Dwayne Eskridge has been a massive flop.
Are you excited to see anything at all out of him with this new regime?
Honestly, if it was, God, they just don't use him, then sure, I would. Absolutely. But he just can't get on the field. He just can't stay healthy. He gets out there. He's on the field for like 3 plays and he gets hurt again. Like, I'm just kind of done. Like, give the guy a chance. I would be very happy to see him stay healthy.
I mean, he's not going to get
productive.
cut, I don't think, because they probably do want to take a look at him, and he's super cheap.
Yeah, he won't get cut the pre-training camp. He may not make it out of training camp. But I can't rely on him. Derek Young is a guy that, as a rookie, showed tremendous upside, but then never actually got healthy enough to get on the field himself. As a sophomore, because he just battled injury. I think he ended up on injured reserve, came back mid-season, but he hadn't practiced and didn't have a training camp and all of that. So it was kind of a lost year for him. Both those guys have talent if they can get on the field. I would love to see this team go and not just assume that both of them are going to be healthy, and to get a guy. And it doesn't have to be like, a first or second round pick, because you've got 3 elite receivers on this team.
So to me,
but they need someone.
Okay, so after we go through this entire process and we get done with all the prospects, we're starting to do mock drafts. We're starting to do the serious roster building and go through free agency and so forth. I think then we'll really truly see what we need. But for me right now, wide receiver is like 6th or 7th on the priority list. I mean,
it's down there.
We've got offensive guard, we've got offensive center, we've got defensive tackle, we've got linebackers, we've probably got a second safety. We've got a quarterback situation. So, I mean, and tight end is, the cupboards are empty there. And so wide receiver is looking pretty good compared to some of the other position groups. But I hear you. You.
No, it's just wide receiver is one of those positions where you need depth. And I see really nice top 3 and then it drops off. And I'm not trying to that's not Jake Bobo hate either, because I like him. But I just think that the lack of depth at wide receiver was felt this last year, even with the top 3 guys that they've got being as good as they are.
Yeah.
Because I just don't trust Young or Eskridge.
Tyler Lockett's not getting any younger.
Yep.
Jackson Smith and Jigba, talent be damned. He's susceptible to nicks, cuts, scrapes, and bruises. Missed a couple of games. Started really the season coming out of injury in training camp.
Didn't play the first week.
With a hamstring. So we'll see.
Yep. And then there's DK Metcalf, who's a freak. And damn, I'm glad he plays in a Seahawks uniform.
Yeah. And there was rumors of him being traded. Not legit rumors, but
no. There are people there are fans that are suggesting, hey, you could go get a massive haul for this guy and your team's not ready to compete yet. So go get a couple of, and then you can replace him because this draft class is so loaded. And honestly, no thanks.
Yeah, I don't think that you can replace DK Metcalf. I really don't. But I think you could get production depending on how. See, here's why they don't trade DK Metcalf legitimately is that John Schneider feels like this team's ready to compete in 2024. He doesn't believe that there's going to be a drop off. between 2023 and 2024. Some fans and others think that just because we've started over with a completely new regime, new scheme, etc., that we're going to have this massive drop off. We still have a pretty darn talented roster now. We've got some holes, obviously, but you're going to be able to manipulate that and fill that. I see it kind of the same way John Schneider does, especially if Geno Smith is going to be the quarterback. There's really not going to be a drop off per se. And so you don't trade one of your best assets to blow up the roster and start over on the roster. This roster doesn't dictate that, I don't think.
No, you trade DK in this spot if you had cut Geno prior to last week when his contract became guaranteed, and you were planning on unloading a bunch of other talent and starting over, and you're looking for as much draft capital as you can so you can get younger and fill in holes and just load up that way. This isn't where this team is. They kept Geno. He's still on the roster. And even if they do draft a quarterback for the future, it's going to be in the way that Kansas City drafted Mahomes when they already had Alex Smith and were a playoff team, right? They're expecting to continue to play and continue to be a playoff team. And while they develop the quarterback, it's going to be that kind of situation. And so I think that you have to, the guys that are here are going to be here. Now they may move some people around and, we've got to replace a defensive lineman, and maybe this is the time to finally move on from Bobby Wagner or whatever. But ultimately, you have young, very talented, very productive, dominant players like DK Metcalf. You don't let them go. Not if you want to win. Not if you want to win now.
And there's enough opportunity to adjust other contracts, cut different players and so forth to generate the salary cap you need to be competitive, to build a competitive roster with DK Metcalf on the roster. And
you might manipulate DK Metcalf's contract in order to create.
He's a young player. He's the kind of player you would want to manipulate the contract
because it makes it there. When you manipulate a contract like that, you're not only saying you're on the team this year, but you're probably on the team guaranteed next year as well. And he's the type of player.
And 4 years from now. Yeah.
So, yep.
Fun. And I would encourage everyone, if you're still listening, if there are dozens of other wide receiver prospects out there that'll be, potentially be drafted. I would definitely tune in to the combine and take a look at some of these guys yourself. And see who separates. We had mentioned
one of the deepest wide receiver classes in memory, and we've had some really good wide receiver classes the last few years. And this one doesn't.
I think this is second to the offensive line class in this draft.
God, the offensive line class is so much fun. That's going to be our next show, isn't it?
Yes. Yay. Well, I think we're going to split that into a couple different shows at least, right?
Whatever. Yeah, we'll do tackles. We'll do interior. But, yep.
Yes.
The only person on this earth excited to talk offensive guards is sitting here talking to you right now.
So just so everyone knows too, we're giving Keith. So this is going to be our last show until next week. This time, as far as putting one into the books, because we're giving Keith an extra week to refine his analysis on the offensive line class. So in fact, I would argue that you should go ahead and just lead the podcast next time through all of these prospects, because man, dude, this is your manna.
It is. I will be digging through the thesaurus, finding new words to describe the same basic skills, because you can only say you can only use the word mauler so many times in one show, or talk about someone's foot speed, and
yes. Right. Space eater. So those will be fun shows. Yeah, I think we'll do like centers and guards and then tackles. I think the tackle class this year is phenomenal. Now, some of those that we'll talk about potentially could move inside and so forth. there's a lot of interior strength in this class. A lot of
there is
like depth. Like if you need an offensive lineman, and you just get one, you're going to get one.
Yeah, and that's what I like about this class. The Seahawks need interior offensive linemen, and they need, they don't just need their starter at guard. They might need a starter at center, but if they think they have the starter at center, they still need a backup, and they need backup guards too. The line is very thin, even where they have players, and they need a couple players. So. This is a good year for this team to get a bunch of offensive linemen and load up and have a group going into camp. You know, someone's going to emerge as that right guard, and you just roll with it.
Yeah. Well, I think Anthony Bradford showed enough where I'm confident that he's going to improve in the offseason, a full offseason.
I said right guard. I say left guard is where
okay. Yeah, well, Damian Lewis. Yeah. So Damian Lewis is a free agent. We don't know if he's going to get paid, if Seattle's going to pay him. I think he should be a priority to bring back.
I don't.
But you just never know. I think, if Leonard Williams and Damian Lewis were the only free agents that we brought back, I would be happy.
See, Damian Lewis was part of the problem last year, and he's probably going to get more money than I think his production show will dictate. In part because there is still untapped potential there, but he also gets nicked up and doesn't stay on the field as much as you'd like. I think you can replace him with a very cheap rookie and get the same out of the position. I like Damian Lewis, but this draft class tells me I would rather take a shot with one or two of these guys and see who emerges than going and re-upping Lewis, because I just think this draft class tells you that you can get away with doing that.
This is why we pay you the big bucks, because that sort of an analysis is amazing. Because, and you're right, I think that you're right, given the draft class, because Damian Lewis is going to be expensive, and we may not have the free agency money to pay him, given the other needs that we have. And I was just looking at, while you were talking, I was just looking at the tackles that we've got on the roster. Really, Jason Peters is going to be gone. Oh yeah, Jake Curhan underperformed. I don't even know if they have him back, but maybe they do it at a very low price. And then we've got Stone Forsythe. I think that we have depth issues at tackle as well. Now, I came into last year in 2023 offseason thinking we're pretty darn good at the offensive line for the first time in a long time. It ended up not playing out that way.
Well, it didn't play out that way in part because, Abe Lucas's knee was problematic, and he never really got back to the level of his rookie year because he was just battling that. Curran continued to not develop, which was disappointing. Although maybe it probably shouldn't have been as surprising. And Forsythe he's a backup. He's never going to be a starter. He's always just a backup talent. And then Cross got hurt even for a while there in the beginning. So it was one of those situations where it just never played out.
And Oluwatimi didn't step up, and Phil Haynes, was hurt, and Anthony Bradford wasn't quite ready at the beginning.
Oh, at the beginning he wasn't, but by the end he was.
Yeah, so it just it was a dud of a season for the offensive line.
Yep, a lot of depth problems. Evan Brown just never really showed, what he was doing, because he was thought of as, he underperformed the year before, but it was at guard, and now you move him to center where he's got less things expected of him as a blocker. He's more being the support than having to hold up one-on-one, but he just never really looked good there either. So it was a rough year.
All right. Fun show then. Fun next couple of shows. Then we'll finish out the offense. We'll turn our attention to the defense. And of course, by then we'll be getting into free agency territory. Actually, we'll come up on the combine in a couple of weeks, and then free agency shortly thereafter. So rapid developments here in the next 4 weeks or so.
Yeah. I'm going to go real quick.
Yep. All right. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast on your favorite podcast platforms and our YouTube channel. And hit the subscribe button when you find it. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.